we're here, like right when this is really starting. I don't see how we don't make it through the 2030s without a Bitcoin standard. The internet without Bitcoin is actually going to centralize and move into a direction that makes the internet a negative in a lot of different ways. The interest rate price controls and the fiat system don't work if people have an escape. Bitcoin is small enough that it like moves like crazy, and dollar is so huge that it's just like really hard to see anything. But as they get closer and you start to see little movements, you just shift. Eventually, one's only going down and one's only going up on a long enough timeline. In 7 years, it'll be a very, very interesting conversation. 7 years, we may be looking back and thinking like, oh yeah, we're already past that point where that market can't operate as if Bitcoin doesn't exist.
I want to start today with, what do you think is the most widely misunderstood aspect in Bitcoin when you talk on the one hand with Bitcoiners, but also on the other hand with normies that are not in Bitcoin? And what should be the topic that I should feature in almost every podcast episode to educate people on?
So the biggest disconnect, without question, and it's funny because like I've been wasting time on on Twitter this morning, and it's with the finance guy or whatever who's having the exact same the mental frame, the picture that he has for what Bitcoin is just so payments app. You know, it's just like it's a monetary asset. And I actually got him to recognize that most people still don't trust Bitcoin, don't understand what it is, and have no conception that it's like a reliable place to store value. And I'm like, yes, trust. The trust market, the cycle of adoption of trust as a monetary good is still incredibly nascent. And, you know, when you look at monetary history and you're trying to compare it to stuff, like he's comparing it to, which this is an analogy that I use quite a bit, is TCP/IP, because it is also a protocol, and protocols have their own difficulties in network adoption, but it's a protocol and the money. And from the context of a money, he's thinking of it like a payments app. It's like, oh, well, Cash App was popular after like 3 years, you know? Why can't I use it at Costco? And I'm like, every other monetary, a good in the market, a new monetary good that has been monetized, literally, it's like an average of a century. Like, Bitcoin is being monetized faster than any other monetary good. The trust network is growing and providing a positive feedback for Bitcoin faster than any other money in history. It is succeeding wildly. And his like, I can't use it at Costco yet, and it's been 15 years, is like, I get that you see apps, you see the internet, you see these technological things that have been adopted. You've never seen a trust network be adopted. You've never seen an asset be monetized from zero. Because if you, and I'm trying right now, actually, the last thing I said to him was, what's the most recent thing that you can think of that was a good that was monetized? What's the most recent one? What was it like? How long did it take? Like, what were the characteristics? And that's like a huge disconnect. All the normies that I talk to, they think in apps, they think in websites, they think in platforms. It's just like, they don't realize that there's genuinely nothing in their span of 20 years of existence or 30 years, whatever it is, that actually relates to Bitcoin they can really apply it to. You can get a general understanding of how difficult the network effect and how the technology stack is going to unfold, because you can look at Bitcoin like a protocol, and we have the internet to compare it to. Bitcoin is a fundamental protocol as core to our communication layers. In fact, arguably below it, even though you kind of need the internet for Bitcoin to work, you technically don't. Like, it's the trust layer actually becomes, it's weird because the internet layer is right here. You've got like the foundation of society. You've got like culture, language, the societal rules and property rights and the political system. And then you've got communication layers, right? Obviously you can't have a communication layer until you have language. So communication layers are above it. And then because of this communication layer, we are able to create a new monetary protocol, except that new monetary protocol is actually down here. it can only exist because of the technology of the communication layer. So it's interesting to think about it that we're building a lower layer on with all of the tools of a higher layer, but like that framing, so we can kind of understand the evolution of the technology stack, because it is a protocol, and we've actually have a very prime and recent example of watching a protocol stack come into being, which most people still don't know much concrete shit about the history of the internet. They just kind of Google it, like, but there's a fascinating and kind of rich history to unpack there, which I've done in a bunch of different episodes on the show. But yeah, 100%. It's that Bitcoin's first network effect and adoption cycle is going to be very long. It's going to be very slow, and it's about trust. It is about trust. It's not about payments. It's not about buying stuff with it at Costco. It's about establishing its trust in the face of 200 some odd monetary competitors, and who also maintain a violent monopoly over the money market. Can it continue to exist, and can it continue to be a money in those markets despite a violent monopoly preventing it? That's what Bitcoin's job is right now. So
that's amazing. And I think the comparison with this TCP/IP protocol is so crucial, because people don't get that. They are always trying to compare MasterCard, PayPal, and everything with Bitcoin, but these are layer 3, 4, 5 technology and not layer 1 technology. And once you study, and I study IT and computer science in school, like when I was like 15, 16 years old, from that onwards moment. And I know the TCP/IP protocols, and still it was for me as a big hurdle to go over through that. But for me, it's like with Bitcoin, you have the possibility to invest in the TCP/IP protocol. This is something mind blowing. Like imagine like don't having to care what application on there will succeed, because with TCP/IP, you had to like, oh, will Facebook succeed? Will MySpace succeed? Will Amazon succeed? And you had to invest in there to gain from that. With Bitcoin, you can invest in the base layer, like in the TCP/IP tokens, if you want to do that. Which also leads me kind of to the next topic. Do you think, and we talked about a little bit, do you think the internet or Bitcoin is then the bigger revolution? Because we could argue that Bitcoin is kind of in the internet revolution and is the monetary aspect of the internet, but it's also its own thing where you can build on top of that.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because Bitcoin as a protocol technically can work on pen and paper. It could actually be, it certainly wouldn't be very efficient. And it wouldn't provide, like, its security mechanism would be very difficult, because you need a kind of broadcast layer for the protocol to actually work. But it could be done, you could, in a really funny way, you could do it in a very slow, high settlement system over snail mail. You could do it over radio. So it's not technically necessary that you need the internet for it. But it's never really going to operate without the internet because of the complexity of the design. So it's not practical without the internet, is probably the better way to put it. So from the context of which is the more revolutionary invention, so to speak, it's a question of which one will have the most impact versus which one is interdependent on the other. Like they are interdependent on each other. Like the internet without Bitcoin is actually going to centralize and move into a direction that makes the internet a negative in a lot of different ways. And Bitcoin without the internet can't really work. The internet is kind of the establishment of the ecosystem, and Bitcoin is the protocol that will create the rules and the incentives for that ecosystem. So the ecosystem alone would lead to these giant centralized platforms and all of these things without a base monetary protocol in it. Which is why the internet was such a profound invention from the context of communication and opening the communication layers of the world. But then Bitcoin, I think, is actually going to reinvent the internet. So Bitcoin is at a lower level from a fundamental consequential layer in society. It establishes rules, the limits of political control. It establishes the cost and ability to exit abusive and violent monopolies and jurisdictions and all of these things. And, if you read like something like Nick Szabo has a great piece on this called Exit and Freedom, is that largely the very means by which freedom is established has nothing to do with getting a political system that is nice or is like really good. It's about lowering the barrier to exit, because if you can exit your value from an intrusive political system, or an abusive or tyrannical political system, well, then you can defund that political system very quickly, because the whole basis of it is to steal value that you didn't, that it doesn't have, that it didn't earn or it doesn't create. If you read something like The Sovereign Individual, I think they have a brilliant thesis that the better way to understand history is through a technological lens on the economics of violence. Is what does it cost to steal something from someone, and what's the degree of the feedback mechanism? This is why the most important things in history for establishing the way society works today have been agriculture, gunpowder, printing press, internet, like all of these things. Like for instance, the state didn't exist before agriculture. And if you think about it through the context of the economics of violence, there's a very simple reason why. Is because if we're hunter-gatherers and we just carry all our value on our back, and it's just like kind of free-flowing society, you can move from one area to another. No mafia can, like, you're not going to stay a slave. You're not going to be, beholden to some sort of mafia that takes half of what you earn and half of what you value. You're just going to throw it all in your back and you're going to leave. So the economics of violence, the ability to exit because you can carry all of your value with you, is very, very low. And thus there's essentially freedom, because abuse does not have this positive, or I guess technically this negative feedback loop, where the stronger they get, the easier it is for them to enforce their control and authority. Whereas when agriculture comes along, now 98% of our value is trapped, stuck right there on the land. I've built a house. I have oxen. I have a harvest that's not even going to come until next year. I have to be here. If I pick up and leave, my cost of exit is now 98% of my value. So when the mafia comes with sticks and, they put a knife to my wife's throat and they say, you're going to give me half of what you earn, that's the lower cost. I give them half of what I earn, because otherwise I lose 98% to leave with my family. Now, sometimes the cost does get that high. Sometimes you don't want to live as a slave, and sometimes you do leave, but you leave 98% of your value for the mafia, so they don't care. And so in thinking about the rules, how this economics of violence establishes the limitations of tyranny in a society, Bitcoin literally shifts the entire dynamic practically back to the hunter-gatherer days. Now I can sell into that system. I can sell into that market for an asset that I can hold in my mind. I can have it in my brain, and I can walk to any other jurisdiction. I can leave to anywhere in the world, and the cost of exit has drastically plummeted, because we have essentially a system of property rights without a state. We have a system of holding and exchanging value without the need for any sort of state enforcement. And in fact, that works in spite of state enforcement, in spite of tyrannical controls, capital controls, and all of these things. And I think the people who don't understand the degree of effect the economics of violence has in the structure of the world today, it's very easy for them to misplace or miscalculate how unbelievably profound the effect of making not even a significant shift, a small shift in the economics of violence changes the world. Bitcoin is a big shift in the economics of violence. Comparably, like, we don't really have a lot of good examples, I think, on something that has changed it so drastically in such a short period of time. And it will continue to take time to realize this in practice. But shit. I think it very much depends on how you treat the interdependent relationship, but I think Bitcoin is by far the more fundamental protocol, and it has a more fundamental change to how we will design or how we will organize as a species.
That's just an amazing speech that you just gave. Wow. Thank you for that. And I think technology in itself is so interesting. And I mentioned before the podcast also you did with Preston about AI. And I think a lot about how AI will play a bigger and bigger role, because I use it myself more and more. And I see it every day, how it gets more intelligent, how it gets better and better integrated, and how it grasps more and more data from all over. And you give so many great examples in the podcast. Do you see, like, first of all, before we go to the dangers of AI, what role do you think, or will AI play a role in the Bitcoin adoption? And obvious question also to ask, will AI choose Bitcoin as the main store of value?
100%. I honestly think AI will largely. You won't be able to disconnect AI from pretty much anything. AI is, in fact, this is like, God, one of the craziest things to think about, like where we are today, is how many, the overwhelming amount of innovation and like new technology that you have in a world or in a market over time. The overwhelming majority is kind of, I forget, there's like a specific term for it. It's like maintaining technology. It's innovation that occurs within the systems that we have. Like rather than changing the piston, intake, exhaust, oh, Jesus Christ. What's the word? Whatever. The piston engine, the internal combustion, rather than changing the fundamental design of the internal combustion engine, I'm brain farting on one piece of it. You make the gears a little bit stronger, or you space them out in a new way to get it slightly more efficient, or you put in a turbo on the intake so you can put in more pressure, or you do electronic valves instead of a manual valve, and you can micro control the amount of release or like input on the pressure, and you can get more efficient with a computer. Like you change little things around the design, but you don't change the system. One of the fascinating things about where we are today is how many systems disruptions we are witnessing at the same time. AI is one of those things. AI is kind of like a way to model a series or a set of patterns at a large scale. I like to think about it as, I think this is a decent analogy, at least a picture. It's not totally accurate, but I've actually, since I thought about this from one of the pieces that broke down that I covered on the show on AI Unchained, for how an LLM works and how the encoding, decoding, and all of this stuff works, is it immediately painted a picture in my mind of like, this is actually a giant compression algorithm for relationships between words, for patterns in language. And so that you could think of it as an insanely lossy compression, so that I can compress a bunch of articles or a bunch of pictures or something, and rather than storing the actual image data, And rather than storing all the individual pixels, which I could do before and I can do on a hard drive, but that takes up an enormous amount of space. Instead, what I've done is I have compressed the relationship between these pixels over here and these pixels over here and connected them to the idea of a cat. And so later on, I am able to, quote unquote, redraw a cat. I'm able to exchange the specificity of the data for computation. And I am able to compute back out of it the pattern of a cat, even though it's not actually a picture of any one particular cat. But there is always some set of relationships between the pixels that a cat basically represents. Our eyes see it, our minds see it all the time, right? I can see that there is a pattern that makes a cat. And if it looks more like a dog, well, I recognize that there's a dog. The brain is a model creation tool. That's a lot of reason that I think people have misunderstandings about where AI is. AI, all of these different AIs are explicit models about explicit sets of patterns, while the human brain is a generalized model creation tool. We create new models about all sorts of things all the time. We're a giant, like, broad, generalized, multimodality model creation tool. So we're more like the computer, the PyTorch, and the software set and the model, because we have thousands of models about all sorts of different things. You know, I have models about how maps work. I have models about physical location. You develop thousands of models about reality before you even can speak. You know, language isn't the entirety of how we relate to the world. Like, I already know not to go jump off a cliff before I'm making full sentences, you know, because I fell down and I hurt myself and I bumped my knee. So like, I have many models of reality. And AI is going to be one of the most efficient and adaptive ways at which we've ever stored and recalled patterns. Like, we're going to be able to basically anything. It's kind of like the assembly line, you know, allowed us to take the meticulous process of, you know, handcrafting all of these things and kind of automated it by recognizing the pattern in the series of events, and then, you know, creating some concrete thing at each piece that stamped out ubiquitous or, you know, equal pieces at each stage of it. And so now, like, only one piece needs to actually be done. Well, this is kind of like that same sort of abstraction for tasks, for patterns in language, for image generation and video generation patterns. And because of that, we basically are yet another step removed from the creation process. And now we're going to organize and understand the relationships between patterns. That's where we're going to be useful, because, again, we're a big general multimodality model creation tool. So we're now going to use all of these individual models, just like I use my model of physics and my model of, you know, light, and like all of those different things, all the models that I have in my relationship with the world. I use a combination of hundreds of these models to go build a tool, you know, build some sort of a project, or put my miner up in my attic. I'm constantly referring to tons of different models in my mind, but the combination of all those things lets me accomplish a task. Well, we're going to be doing the same thing with AI. AI is going to be kind of an interaction layer. Like, already, this is why I started the series called Devs Who Can't Code. And AI is going to be fascinatingly good at writing code, because code is a language, and specifically, it is a language without ambiguity. So while it's actually going to be a little bit difficult at poetry or metaphors or analogies, because it's really abstract, language is an extremely artistic form of communication, and people don't really appreciate that. And so language is actually, it's going to sound like a term paper every time it writes. And if you give it something and you ask it to write you something, it's almost always going to be on the nose. One of the things that I do with my a couple AI tools that I use regularly for the podcast is I have a little script that I built with ChatGPT. So I have a little app that I built. And what it does is when I'm done with any sort of a show, like if I was, we're recording this, is as soon as I was done, I would export the video file, and then I drop that on my transcribe app. And it's going to print out an entire text file with the entire conversation. And then I take that text file and I put it into an LLM, and I say, can you write me a short description? Can you frame it as a question that will, lead the audience's mind toward the content of the show? And I've never actually used exactly what it gave me, but it always has a really good starting point because it will read the context and it will understand what the conversation was about, but it almost always asks an on-the-nose question. So whereas typically I want to ask one step removed. So like a good one was, what was the episode about? Why there was so much antagonism, like the bitter antagonism toward Bitcoin from policymakers. Like, why does Elizabeth Warren literally hate it? Like, why does she hate it? Why does Gary Gensler just have to make sure that Bitcoin ETFs don't get approved? And it basically wouldn't have happened without the court forcing their hand. Well, it's because Bitcoin allows pure price signals. And the reason the fiat system works, the reason interest rate price controls work, is because there's no exit valve. There's not an escape. Christine Lagarde said this explicitly, and Alan Greenspan wrote about it in a paper back in the 60s or 70s or something. He talked about the reason statists have such a profound antagonism, like a hysterical antagonism toward the gold standard, and they come up as much propaganda against it as possible, is specifically because the interest rate price controls and the fiat system don't work if people have an escape. It becomes the alternative price signal. It's essentially the canary in the coal mine for the financial system. So that's why they had to put a cap on it. They had to outlaw ownership, individual ownership of gold. They had to suppress the ETFs. And luckily, gold is, luckily for them, unluckily for us, gold is such an insanely slow and impossible at scale to settle. You just can't settle $100 billion of gold, right? Like France couldn't even do it when they tried. They tried once over the period of 40 years, and the U.S. said no. Back in the 70s. So the ability to at scale force their hand on kind of revealing the true price, it's just not possible. Bitcoin can move $100 billion in a second for $2 transaction fee. Bitcoin can at scale move volume of value like nothing ever in history. And it can do it to any corner of the world instantly. And that's one thing that people don't realize, is that even when transaction fees are $1,000, it's still going to cause, like on the base layer, it is still going to be such an astronomical price signal. Like, you'll be able to move $1 trillion out of a country in 10 minutes. Like, you're talking about killing the survival of a country, the capital in a country, being able to move intraday. Like, that's insane to think about. And even better is the more capital is moving, cheaper it is to do. Like, what's it? It's like a 0.0001% fee at $1,000 transaction fee to move $1 trillion, at scale, Bitcoin becomes, especially if it's available to retail, especially if it has broad global multi-layered networks. You have the Lightning Network, you have retail in the ETFs, you have normal day-to-day users, you have countries like El Salvador adopting it. It becomes this alarm bell for every single time a bad policy decision is made. And as Christine Lagarde said, that our policies, their NERP policies, that, negative interest rates, their attempts to control and choke the debt markets of the world, capital controls only work, price controls only work if you control the entire market. If you have 20% of the market that you can't touch, that 20% is going to reveal instantaneously how stupid your policy is, and all of your prices are false. Black market's going to have 300% of the price that your little price controls are, and black market is the only place that people are going to be able to get those products or services or whatever it is that you're trying to price control. Price controls don't work unless you have a totality over the market. The antagonism toward Bitcoin is specifically because it is an escape valve. As Christine Lagarde says, if there is an escape, people will use it and it won't work. Therefore, they cannot allow an escape. That is where that hysterical antagonism comes from. That was a really, really long tangent to say, going back to the AI thing, is that it's when I get it to ask a question about that, it doesn't give me a question that leads to it. It gives me a question that's like super on the nose. Like, is Bitcoin an alarm bell for a financial policy? And, is it a canary in the coal mine for the financial? Like, it uses like something explicit from the conversation, and then it just gives a bunch of details rather than, what's the source of this deep antagonism to Bitcoin from policymakers? Does it shake the foundations of what they are able to accomplish, and how? That's the removed question that I would be going for. Anyway, holy crap, that was a long tangent for just kind of saying that I think AI is going to be our interface for accomplishing things. Much like we now think of the keyboard and the mouse as this is how we interact with computers. This is how we, you can say that Photoshop killed art, but did it? Of course not. You just have Photoshop art. You still draw on Photoshop. What we're looking at is the base layer of these tools, and it's a new layer. It's a new interface. It's far more akin to touch interface. It's far more akin to the keyboard and mouse, I think, than it is, a production, like a film editing software or something like that. Like, you'll still use it within film editing, I guess, is probably the way to think about it. Like a decent example is my brother was trying to make a funny meme the other day, and he asked me for my help because I know how to use all these tools, and he was just trying to use the Stable Cascade demo, and it wasn't working. And we ended up doing like 20 different things and like trying a bunch of stuff, and we just could not get the picture to look like he described it. It was just a stupid meme. And he ended up going back with like the very original meme and just putting like basic text over it. But it's a good example of like, you can't just go say like, generate this image that I have in my head and then it just pops out. Like, it's very explicit tools for very concrete sorts of patterns. And if you don't know how to composite, if you don't know how to like blend, if you don't have a vision in your mind, well, then you're just going to kind of create the generic image diffusion that the image generator is going to create. And people are going to get bored with that shit. They already have. Like AI image generation, like the stock image generation is already just kind of like scroll past it. Like it doesn't pull the interest that it once did because it's already kind of flooded all over the place. But yeah, anyway, that's the way I think about it is that AI is going to be an interaction layer. It's going to be a UI for how we do things, especially write code. I've just been building constantly, like just these little whenever I have the time to just sit down and, throw 40 minutes an hour at a project. I can just make all sorts of little micro apps, and it's getting increasingly complex, like what you can do with it, which is really exciting. And more importantly, going back to the other part of your question about Bitcoin, is I think one of the things about AI is that, like I said in the compression analogy, is that you're trading computation for data. You're storing the pattern of a thing at 1% of storing the actual thing. And you can't fully take that same exact picture back out of it, but you can restore the pattern of the astronaut or the cat. And because of that, there's an enormous amount of computation involved. And computation you can think of as a proof of work. It is a irreversible final payment. And when you have that computation as the basis for your interaction, imagine if it cost you a penny every time you moved the mouse. Like, it would be insanely difficult to price and deal with the cost of, letting somebody use your API to a website if you were just pulling in a penny, like just all over the place. Every single time somebody does any interaction, it's costing you a penny because you just have an enormous amount of computation with every single thing that's occurring. Well, with AI, you literally have this. They're running into bottlenecks everywhere because it's exploding so fast. In fact, I read an article the other day, and this is something that I'm trying to dig into a little bit more. But it's very possible that we may have a resurgence of nuclear power support and proponents because Google, Apple, Nvidia, and all of these companies are running out of power. Like, they're using so much computation that they're desperate for a huge, dense energy source. And so they're like, well, we've got nuclear. They don't care. They don't care about the politics anymore. They care about a solution, and there's not a direct solution. So they're actually looking at kind of rebuilding this support for nuclear, which is great because nuclear should have been the thing. We should have been going through thorium reactors this whole time. It would have solved a whole lot of shit if the government had gone the thorium route rather than the uranium route. But the governments wanted bombs. They didn't want energy. So we went uranium and plutonium. So it will be fascinating to watch that resurgence occur just because the demand of energy now outpaces what we can actually produce because of the staggering amount of computation. But when you have an irreversible proof of work as a service, well, how do you accept payment on a non-settling, credit-based, identity-based payment system that has billions of dollars of fraud growing every year? Like, it gets worse and worse because the ability to mimic other people and the ability to steal their the ease and low cost of stealing their information. Like, you can get a credit card details, social security, address, and everything for a person. I think it's like $5 a pop typically on the dark web. You can just eviscerate somebody's life. It's so prevalent, like it's so out there that basically all of our information is exposed. It's simply that there's not enough people. You can't exploit it at scale. So literally the only reason we don't all get hit with identity theft every single day is just because there's not enough thieves. Like that's literally the problem. You can't scale the theft fast enough. But the interesting thing about AI is that is going to scale. When I can have a picture of somebody and then I can do a video, like I just did this on my computer the other day. I turned my face into Selma Hayek live on my computer with, I think I was using Face Fusion, or was I using animated? No. Yeah, it was Face Fusion. So like I have like a ton of AI software that I play around with all the time. Now, it did not look good at all because my beard, the bottom of my beard was still there. So it was a very, very creepy Selma Hayek. But it was really funny. I was showing it to my wife. She was like, "Don't ever show me that again. What is wrong with you? Why have you done this?" And I just thought it was hilarious. But like I was live doing that. I was live doing that on my MacBook, and it's not even optimized for M1. So I was basically using CPU level, and if I wanted to do it on my Linux machine, it'd be easy as cake because I've designed this thing to have, I've got 2 beastly GPUs in this and 192 gigs of RAM. So I can do live change my face. Now, what does that mean if I can easily get an ID, or I can use, there's a model now that makes can't really tell it's fake ID. And it's a just small model too, because it's just trained on like driver's licenses. And I can just generate an ID with whatever details that I want. And it's like almost indistinguishable as like a picture. How many things do you require as like proof of identity, your KYC, that is take a picture of your ID and take a selfie? I can do both of those on this computer easy with anybody that I want. I guess I might have to shave my beard if I wanted to be Selma Hayek. But what happens to credit card fraud when you cannot prove who someone is digitally anymore? You need a different system. You need a different system of identity. And that problem is just going to get worse every single year. I was actually just talking about it with my wife yesterday because she was having like a big payment problem. We were just trying to get a new car seat for Rad because he's outgrown his other one. And it's not even like super expensive. It's like $280 or something like that. So it's not like we're spending $10,000 and the bank's going to freak out and be like, what, did you make this payment? And like, there's like some sort of a problem. We have to contact the company and like confirm something on the PNC. So it's just like a nightmare. And I was like, I bet they're getting slammed with fraud right now. Like all of those numbers are up, and AI is only making this easier. And a long enough time scale, when you can, hit an API that pulls $20,000 worth of computation cost overnight, and you have an irreversible service, like they can't get that back. They can't like call up the energy company and be like, it was a fraudulent customer, so we're just gonna like not pay for that energy today. So you have an irreversible proof of work service, and then you also have exploding and easy to do fraud. I think this just keeps getting worse and worse until people realize you have to use an irreversible payment system. You have to use something that settles immediately to pay for a service that settles immediately. And I mean, I don't think it will be super quick because you still have to build trust in the Bitcoin network. And like I said, the trust cycle is slow. But I think it will speed it up because there will be a degree of necessity. Like if you have, 90% of your market is in fiat credit card payments, but there's 20% of that profit now is lost to fraud, to chargebacks, to all sorts of problems. And now you have 10% that's done in, Lightning and Bitcoin, but you have zero fraud because the payment is the payment. At what point does the feedback loop start to benefit? Well, if I can get 1% more of Bitcoin and Lightning service and take 1% away, well, that means I've got like 0.2% less in fraud. Like you can start doing the math on as we shift over. And, once that gets to like 30-40%, you're like, this is looking increasingly stupid that we should just push all towards this direction. And like I said, long timeline, but I think it's kind of inevitable that you have to have some sort of strong settlement system and key-based ID in the world that we're heading into. At least I don't see a different solution. And I'm looking for one. Maybe there is. Like, we're super creative. Humans are really creative people. Everybody's building shit like crazy. Maybe AI comes up with a solution. I don't know.
21 Bitcoin is Bitcoin only from day one, and they teach and preach self-custody. This is my go-to exchange when someone asks me, oh, where can I buy my Bitcoin from? This is the easiest entry for Bitcoiners. And if you want lower fees, plus at the same time support this podcast, use code Robin and click the link in the description. I totally agree with that, that Bitcoin is actually for that problem also the fix. And there's like probably 50 questions I want to ask you just from the last 20 minutes. So it's hard.
Sorry, I ramble. I have context and I just go for it. So
yeah, that's amazing. I love it a lot. And the main thing I think we can now focus on the second part, or like the later part now of the podcast. Well, we have all these factors that contribute to the Bitcoin adoption, and we have AI also, and AI is enhancing that. I think also like that. And there is more and more trust in Bitcoin and less trust in fiat. Fiat is starting to collapse more and more, just like the last 50 years has shown, and the next 50 years, I think, will not be different from that. What will happen to a society which is completely on a Bitcoin standard with all the implications you just mentioned, with trust gaining back? I had one of my first podcasts that I ever had on was a guy who said Bitcoin is a system based of love, because you can actually trust the thing again, and trust is deeply connected with love. So what do you think will happen when we have this complete sound money standard and we have this utopia of only Bitcoin? Do you actually, like, first of all, do you think this will happen in like the next 100 years in our lifetime, or does it take more than that because the trust is slower to gain? And what will then society on that look like, or does it look different even?
So, like I said, trust takes it's a very slow network effect, and it's a very hard won network effect, because trust is lost quickly, built very very slowly, and I think honestly our move to a Bitcoin world is 10 to 15 years. Like I really like Alex Vetsky's 3 generations theory, which would put us at 25-ish, 30 years maybe. I'm not so sure. I think that there's an element, like I basically, after I read that article, he made a very very strong argument for the 3 generations theory, and I love it. And one of the most potent tools for change and like critical things for adaptation. Or what's the quote? Science progresses one death at a time. Something like that. I can't remember who it is. But it's like Newton or some shit. Somebody you would know. But that you need a generation that lives in a world where Bitcoin, like there are people who are born now who are 15 years old, never knew a world without Bitcoin. It always existed. And once you have those people at 25 and 30, and they're the base of a new growing economy, that 20 to 35 age range is really like what they are building and what they think about the world is where all of the change is going to occur, or at least the bulk of the change in society is going to occur. And I think we've reached a pace, a crazy, crazy space when we're talking about the acceleration of technology, where we have disruptions on top of disruptions. 100 years ago, disruptive and systemic technologies, going back to the context of, or the analogy of the piston engine, most of it's maintaining technologies, whereas disruptive technologies are very, very infrequent. That's not the case anymore. And one of the things that, like, there's a great book called, I think it's the Cold Start Problem, or maybe the Secrets of Sand Hill Road. No. It's the Innovators. Oh, hold on a second. I've got it in my audiobooks. There's a great book by a guy from the 90s. He's a professor, and he's talking about the differences between The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. And he talks about, he uses that same analogy of the maintaining technologies versus the disruptive technologies, and how for a long time we thought of companies as you could build a base in like some sort of a product or service, and then you can operate as like brilliant managers, reflecting, with your, or working with your customers, and, being efficient and not taking huge risks and looking for the big things in the market. And that worked. You could sustain a company like that for 50 years, 70 years, 100, a century even. And that's not possible anymore. Sometime in the 80s to 90s, there were so many disruptive changes, from 8-inch discs to 5-inch discs, and from magnetic to spinning discs, like disruptive changes in the context of the entire function and mode by which we would actually do these things shifted like really quickly. The first 50 years of the idea of recording audio, like it was scratch it into a piece of vinyl. It was scratch it into a thing. And then we went from CDs to digital. Like we went in like super compressed time. We went over like 4 different mediums, from cassettes, CDs, and digital, like 15 years, 20 years, something like that. And this is accelerating all across the board. And companies no longer can actually establish like the actually being a good manager as a company will actually kill you now. Because if you're responding to your customers and you're just looking for the maintaining innovations, what you're actually doing is, if you're not looking for something that will disrupt your business process, like disrupt your entire model, then you're going to miss it, and you're just going to die in the next cycle. And the next cycle is 4 years away. Like it's here every single time. And we're in this weird place where we have disruptions on top of disruptions, where we have a disruptive cycle that's occurring with a new technological framework or a new protocol layer. And before it is even like reached any sort of serious maturity in its adoption cycle, there's already the new thing that's going to disrupt it. Like we're starting to, like, it used to be that you get on this S curve and then it would start to smooth out, and then boom, here's this new disruption, and then it would get on an S curve and start to smooth out, and these things were like really gapped together. And now they're starting to compress so that like 4 or 5 of them are happening at the same time. So the comment or the concept of like the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed, is getting way worse, because all of the futures are here, and we don't even know, like we're all, the pace at which humans are learning how to adapt and use things hasn't increased. So if it still takes us 10 years to adopt and understand how a new technology is going to change things and how to integrate it in our lives, but a new disruptive technology is happening every year and a half, well, we're going to be 10 behind, as soon as we've adopted the one that we were trying to figure out. And so we're in this really weird place where everything is just massively accelerating. What was the context of the original question? I'm sorry. This was like laying the groundwork for something.
This how this Bitcoin world looked like, I think, was the complete original question, and how this Bitcoin standard will like have a change on society.
Yes. So the Bitcoin standard. So the interesting thing is that when you have fiat money, it's like society moving. Everything is done through molasses. Like you're like knees deep in water. You know how you try to sprint through water? It's like a nightmare, right? It's like it's infuriating, and you look like an idiot because your legs are flying out to the side because you're trying to get out of the water. This is essentially what fiat money does to society, because it is a constant signal, a misinformation mechanism in the attempt to communicate value between each other, because there is no solid way to communicate value. I mean, it is money. Like, it is an intersubjective thing. It is only by the cost, it is only by the comparison that we actually understand the value of anything. Like I can bitch about my iPhone not letting me plug, a USB thing into it or whatever. I can be like, this is annoying and it's not valuable, but it only is in the context of like what it's related to, is the fact that there is some other device over here in which I can do that. And so I want that. But if you take my smartphone and all of its capabilities and the internet and you give it to somebody in 1890, it's worth $1 trillion. It's worth the entire world, because it's a scope of existence. It's otherworldly. It's literally alien technology. It's like having a fucking Harry Potter wand. So in the context of like what it costs to achieve and what the alternatives are, it's comparatively the most valuable thing in the world. Well, I sit here and bitch about the fact that it didn't plug in. I got to get an adapter, and so in that context, it's an incredibly difficult thing to communicate, because it is all relative. It's like speed. If you don't have anything to relate it to, you could be moving a bajillion miles an hour, technically, in outer space, and you're just sitting still, like nothing's happening. Value is that same way. And because it's intersubjective, you have to have skin in the game in those decisions. Fiat removes that skin in the game. Fiat removes the ability to have accurate comparisons between you and I, because money is not the same for you as it is for me. And it's not the same for the central banker or the finance guy as it is for the people at the bottom. Like, we all have different relationships with money, because the money is people. There's just new printing, new debt, new this and that happening at every different stage. It's just constant floods of misinformation in the market, which means that a Bitcoin standard will just be like, instead of knee deep water, solid ground. what becomes easier? What things do you do that are so difficult or annoying in knee deep water? When you're on solid ground, you're like, oh, we could do that. We could pull that off. Oh no, that makes perfect sense. Like that's not gonna be hard. We can run marathon. Why not? Why not? I'm not gonna do that shit in knee deep water, but I'll do it now. And so it removes this huge misinformation signal, and it's going to allow the spread. I think it's actually critically necessary, because thinking about like the layers of disruption, the speed with which the new technology can disperse and actually be adopted is related to the ability to communicate its value, which means that it might actually, thank God, have the capacity to shorten that span to distributing the future to as many people as possible, as opposed to keeping it in some niche corner and making it difficult to get out to the public, to do the most good. Like this is something that we actually saw during the 30s, like during the Great Depression. A lot of people think that like during like huge economic contractions and depressionary periods, the innovation stops. That's not true. Innovation stops spreading. We still have tons of new innovations. We still have tons of new like inventions and like fundamental ideas, but they cannot get out from the market. There's not the economic health to distribute it to people. So it basically stays isolated until it's unlocked. And that's why we had this huge boom after World War II ended, because World War II and this giant, like direct, I'm going to control everything spending program for the government persisted a depression for 12 years. That just eviscerated the economy and the ability for anything to be healthy. And when they finally let it go, when they finally brought everybody, they stopped wasting money on blowing shit up, and they brought everybody back into the workforce to build stuff. What do you know? There was a boom. They're like, oh, the war saved us. And it fucking didn't. The war ended and it saved us, you dummy. But anyway, but it's a great example, because if you think about that, like, again, innovation and disruption the progress of technology didn't stop during the 30s. It was just prevented from getting out to people. You can think about our current era very much like that. Because of how bad the fiat system is, we have an enormous amount of disruptive technology. In fact, we have more than we ever have because of the natural progression of feedback loops. New technologies enable the progression of more and better new technologies. Like, what is the internet? I mean, you can now disrupt things in a matter of hours. You can now create a new software system as a 13-year-old kid in your garage because of the existence of the internet. Like, everything accelerates the next thing. But we have existed in this place where it's also been made incredibly slow to distribute, incredibly difficult to get out. And it still has continued to do so despite it, but just because of this is a force of nature, like the movement of technology. I mean, you look at the last 100 years and the amount of just obliteration of poverty across the world. Like people don't realize. Most people bitch and whine about something as it's being solved, because when it's basically ubiquitous, nobody complains about it. Like, nobody had candlelight vigils about poverty in the 1890s. Everybody was poor. Poor was normal. You know, it's only when you start to realize that this could actually be solved that everybody complains about it. Everybody says, this is awful. I can't believe we've allowed this to happen. It's like, no, this was the norm. Now you realize that there's a way out, and now you're angry at it. So excuse me. So going back to the concept of a Bitcoin standard, I think we'll witness a renaissance as close to what we could comprehend as a renaissance. We're talking about removing so much friction in the market. We're talking about removing political barriers across the world so that we can interact with other markets. We're talking about AI, which will remove linguistic and cultural barriers across the world to add to it. I really think it won't be very long before I'll have a Spanish version of Bitcoin Audible read in my voice with my tonality and my emphasis. I don't speak Spanish, you know? And I don't think it's like really soon that I could have my show in any language that I wanted. In fact, I can basically do it. It just kind of sucks right now. You know, it's like 90% of the way there. In fact, I might actually do an investment of just having like somebody who natively speaks Spanish make the corrections. But it's like a combination of tools, but it's just like we're just barriers. Barriers are plummeting, and we don't know what the outcomes We don't know what a world looks like without those barriers. But I'll tell you, it looks, it's at least an order of magnitude more productive, more faster, and more cleanly communicated than what we have now. And it is going to be, if nothing else, it's going to be a hell of a time to live through. Like it's just, sometimes I just think like of the entire path of history, like, and the little blip that we are at this crazy acceleration curve. And when sound money is actually reinstituted at a scale that it was never possible, like gold could never produce a society the way a digital commodity and a digital communication protocol that is genuinely global could do. Like you're talking about the difference between a digital world and a physical world, and what that potential is. Like it's 1,000-fold, you know, like it just, you can't compare the two. And like, we're here, like right when this is really starting. I think people think it's like, oh, look at, you know, what's happened in like the last 30 years. The internet's like gotten big. No, it literally is just starting. Like we're in the curve of that whole transition, and it's getting faster and it's accelerating. That's why I think, you know, 99% of this Bitcoin supply will be here in 2034. And that last 1% will take 100 years, more than that, to distribute. I don't see how we make it to the 1930s. I mean, the 1930s. I don't see how we don't make it through the 2030s without a Bitcoin standard. With the way things are going now, and the fact that feedback loops catch up quick.
Amazing.
Gradually, then suddenly.
And I say this so many times on the podcast. It's like whenever I think of what we are just now living through, I can only think of what a time to be alive. Like what privilege, and what
it's crazy.
Like how grateful can we be to live right now? And yeah, there's also like so many things in there that we should be talking about. And I think I just thought of something that that I will do now on the podcast. And because I did till now, I never had a guest on 2 times. So I want to have guests on also a second round, but like with a year or something like that in between. And I never thought about that before. But if I have questions listening to you, probably listeners also to this podcast have questions about that. So please, if you have a question the guys want, just leave it in the comment. And when I have a second round with you, I will take this also as a basis that we can make a second episode. And then we might have some interesting questions and some interesting influence in that. I started sometimes doing it. I think I did it with Jeff Booth when I had him on like a few weeks ago. I asked the community what questions should I ask.
Booth is great, man.
He's also an amazing man to listen to and to interview. And yeah, then I will do that. And we're coming to the end routine where the previous guest is like a little bit like the blockchain. The previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest is. And then you will also then ask a question to the next guest without knowing who the next guest is. And the question to you from the previous guest is about real estate. And he talked a little bit on the podcast how the homeowners now are old and they will die soon, and how real estate is such a worse investment against Bitcoin when you really compare it. But still, so many people have the belief system that, oh, I have to have a home I want to invest in, and this is kind of my savings account. I take a credit against it, and then I can like take my home as my main savings account and misuse a home as a savings account. And the fleeing of the real estate to Bitcoin, it's like the demonization of real estate. And we kind of touched on it when you talked about Bitcoin standard, how fast it will go. And he talked about how fast do you think it will go that we are coming to a collapsing house prices, to affordable house prices, Bitcoin makes, I think so, house prices affordable again. Do you think, do you have a timeline where like, okay, this will happen in the next 5-10 years? And I think was kind of in the last question in there. But is this comparable?
Yeah, 100%. I think when you look at like kind of a 10-year time frame, as Bitcoin really settles in as a trusted asset that's not going anywhere, it will be, especially when we talk about like closing costs and political risk, the cost of real estate will start being weighed against the cost of just buying Bitcoin and holding it. Because a huge amount of the real estate market is about storing value. It is a huge portion of it is store value. Like one of the statistics I heard on it is that a third of luxury housing in the Manhattan area sits empty all year. A third. Like, that's insane. It gets used for nothing. People are just sitting on it because it's going to go up in value, but it's not. It goes up in nominal price, not value. And the only reason I think real estate is actually the best form of calculating inflation as we have, because it's the predominant store of value, I think, in my opinion, for getting around the inflation problem, and people don't know it. Like, even for like, it is the middle class savings account is equity in your home. Like I bought this house for, like, this was a small, like, I was trying to spend as little as I possibly could. I even got an FHA loan. I tried to put as little Bitcoin into it as possible because, 7 years ago, like I saw Bitcoin's future and trajectory. And I bought this house for $157,000. It was 100% fix me up. Like, it had some problems. And I haven't done like an appraisal on it for, we ripped out this rotten MDF kitchen and we put in nice custom wood cabinets and quartz countertops. Oh, we completely remodeled 2 bathrooms. Oh, I dug out the 8-foot crawl space. I excavated around it, waterproofed the whole thing, and now it's a concrete basement. And I've added, 1,100 square feet to the house. None of that is being calculated. If you just look at the Zillow estimate for what it costs to have this house, according to its ignorant thinking or its ignorant perspective that it's just the same house as it was when I bought it, virtually, it's like $360,000. It's not worth, like, it didn't get worth more. The dollar got shittier. The dollar lost value. Like, there are people, and if I sold it, I'd pay capital gains. I'd pay capital gains on getting around inflation. And if I, sold it for this, I can't buy more house. I can't like go, to the other side of town and buy something way bigger. I buy the same thing. Like, and if you calculate it for, it's like probably like $450,000. If you calculate what I've actually done to it, like in the fact that it's like way, way better condition than when I got it. And like, that's crazy. That's crazy. That's like, that is the destruction of a currency right there. Like, if you're not framing it right, you just don't understand how awful that is from the context of money. That's why Bitcoin as a pure price signal is going to completely change the game. Because my entire relationship to this house is the fact that, like, I need it for utility. I'm not using it to hedge against the dollar. I'm holding the debt to hedge against the dollar so that I don't have to sell my Bitcoin. But my Bitcoin is my pricing mechanism. What it will cost me in Bitcoin over that time is how I make my decisions. So I buy this house not because I think of it as an investment. I think of it as a loss in Bitcoin, but I need a house. I'm we have a family, like I want to have like 16 more kids. And so like it is a utility cost to me. Like I'm buying it for its utility. It is not an investment anymore. And that mind shift, that shift in mental framing will start to occur more and more at a larger and larger degree as the trust network, as the trust adoption of Bitcoin grows, and real estate will be priced. Real estate won't sit empty. Real estate will not sit empty, because that means that your opportunity cost to have Bitcoin is going to just keeping up with inflation and still paying capital gains. So you're doing worse than just exiting the real estate, which means that real estate prices will plummet. But I think it will actually accelerate faster, specifically because like the commercial real estate market has imploded since 2020, and it's only because of the BTFP, the financing program, that it's essentially not come home to roost yet. And I think when that kind of like fully implodes and we get our unraveling of the banking crisis there, which has started within the New York Community Bank, I think probably like Zion and it's M&T, Wells Fargo is actually really exposed to this one. I think it's like 22% of their reserves are in commercial real estate. That's a big one. That would be bad. But anyway, it's gonna be really interesting to watch that unfold. And I think there could be a second. I think we'll have kind of a general real estate collapse, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays into it. Because if I was thinking about like just a normal progression from one to the other, Bitcoin would take 10 years, but it could be 2 years and then a heavy acceleration in that direction. And as a serious banking crisis and real estate crisis unfolds in the debt markets, and a negative feedback loop for fiat and for real estate will accelerate, not slow down. Like it's unlikely to reach some sort of plateau. Let me give you an example. So when Bitcoin starts to become like let's say like a bad policy gets implemented and Bitcoin goes up 20%, like it becomes this extremely loud, very in your face indicator of the potential market fallout of policy decisions and like what's going on in the credit markets. As it starts to do that, when it becomes a $5 trillion market, a $9 trillion market, you'll start to see it show up in fiat. It won't just be that Bitcoin goes up. It'll be that fiat dips 1%, 2% immediately, like fast. And fiat will become increasingly volatile in the negative, and Bitcoin will continue to be higher, will continue to be up. And when that happens and it's recognizable, it becomes visible on the fiat side, well, then it becomes even dumber to not have some exposure to Bitcoin, and to like that feedback loop becomes more exaggerated. And then when people say like Bitcoin is volatile, it's like, well, fiat is volatile. They made a decision today and it fell 3%. And when you start having that sort of, when it simply is, when you can see it happening very, very quickly, is when I don't think there's any reversing. I think you've hit the point of no return, where it's just going to continue to accelerate, because you add another $2 trillion to the Bitcoin market. And now every single move, right now we're in this place where Bitcoin is small enough that it like moves like crazy, and dollar is so huge that it's just like really hard to see anything. But as they get closer, and you start to see little movements, like I think you just shift, like you eventually just, one's only going down and one's only going up on a long enough timeline. And once you start to see that volatility show up on both sides of essentially the river, you're pouring water from one to the other. And you start to notice that the water is changing over here because this bucket is now big enough. I think it accelerates really fast. Because price signals are everything. And right now it's not visible. Right now, you still can't see it because Bitcoin's very small. It really is small when you talk about like its actual market cap. So I would really love to reassess in 3 years to see where I think it is. And I think in 7 years, it'll be a very, very interesting conversation. In fact, 7 years, we may be looking back and thinking like, oh yeah, we're already past that point where that market can't operate as if Bitcoin doesn't exist. It still can, but I don't think it will for very long.
Yeah, definitely. I can 100% subscribe to that. And I think it was an astonishing episode with you. You're a really, really insightful person. You read and listen.
Sorry for the ramblings.
No, it's like
they go.
It's always crazy good to see if someone actually reads a lot. Like it's clear that you have so much information.
I read more about Bitcoin than anybody else you know. What are you talking about?
Right. So, and this is that's why it's such an amazing conversation with you. And I had I think I got to 1/5 of my questions.
Oh my God.
I always try to over prepare and then let the conversation flow freely. But thank you so much for being on. Thank you so much for taking the time and being on my show. I definitely want to make a second round and maybe next year or something like that. And where can people ask you directly questions? Where can people reach out to you? Where can people find you the best way?
Yeah. I am on Twitter. Obviously, that's still a great way to hit me up in DMs. Though they limit now who can send DMs, and like I filter through a ton of crap. So if it takes me a week to get to you, I apologize. If it takes me a month, that's my bad. But still, DMing on Twitter is still a useful thing. Hitting me up on Telegram is actually probably a higher hit rate. Noster is a good one too. I'm at the Guy Swann on all of it. Just the Guy Swann with 2 N's. And of course you can check out Bitcoin Audible, AI Unchained. And I've got another project actually that's been in the works for a little bit, that'll come out soon on the show side. And then I've also got a development project that we've been working on. So lots of stuff to come. I'd love to check those out. And I've been trying to do a lot of little like explainer, like I've been referring to them as Guys 2 Sats. My 2 Sats videos where I'm trying to distill, because I have I'm going to tell you something you don't know, but I have a tendency to ramble for an hour on a topic when asked a question. And I'm trying to do my best to distill this shit down into like 3 minutes. And it's very, very hard. It takes a week to really like bring it down, edit it to what the heart of the argument is. But I'm trying to do that in videos, and they've done really, really well. They've gotten a lot of attention. So I think that's a really good one. And then, of course, Keat. I know a lot of people don't know about Keat, but honest to God, when I think about like the most important things that are happening right now and the kind of critical technological changes, when I think about the layers of disruption that I mentioned, I think Bitcoin, AI, Noster, and Keat. Well, not Keat. Hole Punch is the protocol. Keat is just kind of an application built on top of it. But it's the proof of concept that, holy shit, this works. Check it out if you haven't. I think it is the most unsung of the most important things that are happening right now, and I spend my whole day on it. So definitely check that out too. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh wait, am I asking a question for the next guy?
Yes, I usually do it offline, but you can also do it while we're recording.
Okay, got you. I'll make it very simple. Is what's the most important thing?
Perfect.
What's the most important thing? That's it.
Love it. It's fascinating for me because you're my 77th guest on, and I did not have any question 2 times. So let's see how long this streak continues. Perfect. Then thank you for taking the time, and we'll see you soon.
Hell yeah, man. Appreciate it, dude.